Isolated beneath the blazing summer sun, former soldier Ethan Walker thought silence was finally his friend. He was wrong. Inside the old mountain house he just bought, his loyal dog Shadow, a shepherd who had faced war without a tremor, suddenly stiffened. Not fear, not curiosity, but a warning sharper than any weapon. Shadow's claws scraped urgently at the stone chimney, refusing to stop, eyes locked on the ancient rock, as if something beneath it still breathed. Something buried for 15 long years. Something men with power would kill to keep hidden. Ethan's heart pounded. His dog had never failed him before. What secret slept under those cold stones? And who was coming back for it? Stay with us, because this mountain has been waiting far too long for the truth to rise. Please support our mission by subscribing to the channel. Summer heat pressed down on the mountains of Flagstaff, Arizona, the air shimmering above the red dust road as Ethan Walker's truck rumbled up the final incline. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other absently resting on the thick fur of Shadow, the German shepherd seated proudly in the passenger seat like a silent guardian. Shadow, 9 years old but still powerful and alert, carried a coat of dark gray and warm chestnut tones. His amber eyes were sharp with intelligence, a lingering glint of a soldier who had seen war and trusted almost nothing except the man beside him. Ethan, in his early 40s, once bore the rugged confidence of a U.S. Army staff sergeant. Now his profile, lined by sun and years of restless nights, carried a quieter determination. Lean shoulders, close-cropped brown hair, tinged lightly with gray, and a jaw often clenched out of habit, as if he expected danger even in peace. His blue eyes were watchful and introspective, reflecting a soul that had returned home but not entirely found it again. The house finally appeared, an old structure perched on a shelf of rock and pine roots, overlooking a wide valley of whispering green. It was smaller than the listing photos, but Ethan was used to disappointment. The clapboard siding peeled like sunburned skin, windows clouded by dust and time. Yet the stone chimney, built entirely from mountain rock, rose in a firm, unwavering column. That, more than anything else, had drawn Ethan to buy this forgotten home. Solid, unshakable. Something he had not felt in years. Outside the truck, the summer cicadas droned like a static hum, and the air smelled of hot resin from the pines. Ethan inhaled deeply. "Home," he muttered, though the word tasted unfamiliar on his tongue. Shadow jumped down first, paws landing silently. He sniffed the earth, the steps, the front door, mapping this new territory with quiet efficiency. Ethan set down his lone duffel bag and toolbox, pushing the creaking door open. The hinges protested like old bones. Inside, the house was dim, the stale scent of wood and long-settled dust greeting them. Furniture remained, an abandoned table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a sagging couch. A ceramic mug sat alone, as if someone had only paused their morning to step outside for a moment, planning to return. But 15 years had passed. Ethan ignored the chill crawling up his spine. Soldiers didn't fear ghosts, only living threats. He walked through the space with measured steps, his boots brushing an untouched layer of dust. His mind worked quietly, assessing, adjusting, imagining repairs. The house needed everything: new windows, new paint, new wiring, new life. Yet he found himself drawn, as if pulled by intuition, toward the massive stone fireplace dominating the far wall. Cool shadows clung around it. The stones were perfectly fitted, smoother than the rough exterior walls, almost too perfect. Shadow was already there, standing rigid, ears pricked sharply, forward. Muscles tensed like coiled rope. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" His voice, usually steady, carried a note of unease. Shadow didn't look back. He nosed the lower stones with growing urgency, breathing fast, claws scraping the rock as if something underneath demanded attention. Ethan knelt beside him, running his fingers over cracks and seams. The mortar felt different in places, younger, like someone had sealed it long after the chimney was built. A pulse of adrenaline flickered through Ethan's veins. His instincts awoke, those he had tried to bury under sunlight and quiet mountain days. He sat back on his heels, watching Shadow's determination. This wasn't random agitation. On combat patrols, Shadow had detected explosives buried beneath dirt floors, saved lives with that same fixed focus. Ethan's chest tightened painfully at the memory of comrades who didn't make it home. Shadow looked at him then, eyes speaking in the silent language they'd learned in war. "Trust me. It's here." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Okay, we'll check it out." His voice steadied, but inside a quiet storm swirled, suspicion, curiosity, dread mixing into something dangerously addictive. He had wanted peace, not puzzles, but peace had never wanted him. He stood, brushing dirt from his palms, and forced his attention to the rest of the house. Later, he told himself. First, settle in, then tear apart history. Shadow stayed by the fireplace, sitting like a sentinel guarding a secret no one else could sense. Ethan unpacked, but every movement felt mechanical, his thoughts circling that stone structure like vultures around an unseen wound. Why seal the fireplace's base? Why leave everything else behind? And why abandon a home as if time stopped mid-breath? As dusk began to claim the sky, painting the windows in rust-orange light, Ethan lit an old lantern he found on the counter. The house glowed faintly, but shadows along the chimney still thickened, heavy as a held breath. Shadow growled, low, soft, almost mournful. Ethan froze. Goosebumps prickled his skin beneath the summer heat. Whatever waited under those stones had not forgotten it was here. Ethan spent the first night in the mountain house fighting against his own thoughts, rather than the heat. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind brushing against the siding felt amplified in the darkness. Shadow remained stationed in front of the stone fireplace, head resting on his paws, but eyes open, always open, like he feared blinking might allow something beneath the stones to escape. Ethan tried to sleep, but the sense of being watched crept through his veins. When dawn finally arrived, it spilled sunlight into the cabin as if trying to purge the night. Shadow seemed calmer, but not at ease. Ethan brewed instant coffee and stared at the chimney while sipping the bitter liquid, wondering what secrets demanded a guard dog's vigilance even while resting. To distract himself, he decided to drive down into town for supplies. 10 minutes along the winding dirt road, a figure appeared ahead, walking alone where few dared to walk. Ethan slowed and saw a woman turn to face him. She lifted a hand casually in a greeting that suggested she was familiar with strangers. Ethan rolled down the passenger window. Shadow, sitting tall, kept his gaze locked on the newcomer. "Morning," the woman said, voice soft yet confident. She had a slender build, slightly above average height, with sun-kissed skin and light freckles scattered across her cheeks. Her chestnut brown hair was tied loosely behind her head, strands escaping freely in the breeze. Her green eyes carried a spark of curiosity and something sharper, resilience forged through hardship. She wore a canvas work shirt rolled at the sleeves, faded jeans, and boots caked in dry earth, clearly someone who lived close to the land. "You must be the new owner of the Carlton place, Joe," she added. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Carlton Place?" "Locals call it that," she explained. "After the folks who built it long ago. No one stayed more than a few months since the last owner disappeared." The pause in her sentence was subtle but intentional. Ethan noted the word she chose but didn't bite. "Ethan Walker," he introduced, offering a nod. "This is Shadow." Shadow gave a low rumble of acknowledgement, not threatening, but not welcoming either. "Nice to meet you, Shadow," she said with a small smile. Not intimidated. She introduced herself as Mia Carter, a wildlife biologist in her mid-30s who worked for Arizona's Conservation Office. Her job involved monitoring mountain lion movements and forest health in the region. Her personality seemed warm, though there was caution there, as if she'd been disappointed by people before and taught herself never to trust too fast. "Be careful up there," she warned, tone changing slightly. "The mountains can be complicated. Weather, wild animals, old stories." "Old stories," Ethan repeated. She shrugged lightly, eyes flicking briefly away. "People around here don't forget the past just because time passes." Shadow leaned closer to the window, sniffing the air aggressively toward her boots. Ethan noticed dried mud on them, and a faint metallic scent carried up by the heat. "Blood?" Mia saw his look. "Mountain lion territory," she explained quickly. "Had to check on a rancher's herd this morning. Lost a calf overnight." Ethan relaxed slightly, but not completely. War had taught him that trust should never be given away for free. She glanced toward his truck bed. "Headed for town?" "Supplies," Ethan said simply. "You?" "Hiking back down to my Jeep," she answered, pointing down the road. "Parked a bit further." Ethan hesitated, then offered, "Want a lift?" Her smile widened. "I'd appreciate that." She climbed in the back seat, giving Shadow his personal space. The dog continued watching her, as though trying to measure her intentions through scent alone. As they drove, Mia mentioned the former owner, Daniel Moore, a journalist who had moved here chasing a story about illegal mining runoff poisoning the watershed. He'd been determined, some said, obsessed. Then one day, he vanished, left his truck, his notes, his whole life behind. The sheriff's department chalked it up to a tragic accident. Most residents accepted that. A few did not. Ethan felt Shadow shift beside him, and that tightening in his gut returned, like puzzle pieces sliding into place in the dark. Mia pointed out a turnout near the forestry access gate where her dust-covered old Jeep sat beneath a ponderosa pine. She thanked Ethan for the ride and rested a hand briefly on the window frame. "If you need anything, or if something feels wrong, find me," she said. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment that suggested she already sensed his secret unease. Then she got out. As Ethan pulled back onto the road, Shadow turned in the seat to watch her disappear behind them, the dog's ears stiff and his body taut. Ethan didn't ignore the signal. His instincts echoed it. Someone else in this town still remembered Daniel Moore. Someone else still cared enough to warn him. And whatever waited beneath the fireplace stones was a story people were willing to kill to bury. He pressed harder on the accelerator. Shadow stared forward again, silent, but clearly knowing. The truth had already found them. There was no turning back. Shadows stretched long across the clearing by the time Ethan returned from town, the sun dipping behind the tall pines like a watchful eye closing for the night. The heat of the day still clung to the air, but inside Ethan's chest, a colder sensation had taken root, a tightening coil of questions sparked by Mia's warnings. Shadow leapt down from the truck before the engine fully stopped, tail stiff, ears angled forward as though expecting the mountain itself to answer a challenge. The dog moved directly toward the stone fireplace again. No hesitation, no curiosity, only purpose. Ethan set the supplies on the counter and stood for a moment, listening. The cabin was quiet, but not peaceful. He could sense a tension in the walls, as if the house strained to hide its secrets. He removed his flannel shirt, rolling up his sleeves. "All right," he muttered, voice rough with determination he no longer bothered to deny. "Let's see what you're trying to show me." He grabbed a crowbar from his toolbox. The tool was old, steel weathered from years in army gear, but reliable. Shadow nuzzled the base of the fireplace once more, paws planted like he refused to let anyone steal his place. Ethan knelt and pressed his fingers along the seams between the stones. In daylight, the difference in texture was even more distinct. Most mortar lines were rough, brittle from time, but one rectangular slab was framed with smoother, darker sealant. Someone hadn't sealed it. They'd locked it. He jammed the flat end of the crowbar into the groove. For a moment, nothing happened except the scrape of metal against stone. Then the slab shifted, just a fraction, but enough. Sweat trickled down Ethan's back as he pried harder, muscles tightening beneath tanned skin. With a harsh grind, the slab gave way and tilted upward. Shadow backed up to give Ethan space, but his nose tracked the dark opening that appeared beneath. Ethan held his breath as he lifted the stone away completely and set it aside. Underneath lay a small chamber carved into the earth, not deep, maybe 3 feet, but carefully lined with stones to keep soil from collapsing inward. Inside he saw 2 things resting quietly: a metal lockbox painted in chipped army green, and a leather-bound notebook, edges cracked from years of hiding. He reached for the notebook first. The cover felt dry and delicate, like it might crumble under too much pressure. A faint smell of dust and old ink rose from it. Shadow hovered close, his warm breath brushing Ethan's arm. Carefully, Ethan opened the first pages. Handwriting filled the sheets in neat rows, precise, determined strokes of a man who wanted his truths to be undeniable. At the top of the first page, "Property of Daniel Moore." His pulse quickened. He flipped through sketches of terrain maps, notes referencing water samples, and names, some scratched out violently with ink. But before he could decipher more, Shadow growled low, deep in his chest, a warning vibrating through the floor. Ethan froze, instincts firing instantly. He snapped the notebook shut and extinguished the small lantern he'd set beside him. Silence swallowed the room. Shadow crept toward the window, fur bristling. Ethan followed, rifle leaning against the wall just in reach. He brushed a hand over Shadow's back. The dog was taut as a drawn bowstring. Outside, dusk had fallen into a violet haze, the forest turning into a blur of shifting shapes. And then Ethan saw it. Movement between the trees, a silhouette tall and broad-shouldered, pausing just beyond the clearing. Whoever it was stood still, watching the cabin, watching them. Not a hiker, not a neighbor. No one should be here. The figure stepped slightly into a sliver of moonlight, just enough to reveal dark clothing and gloved hands. His stance gave nothing away, neither hostile nor relaxed, but intent. Ethan couldn't see his face clearly, only the gleam of eyes that seemed too focused to be innocent. Shadow's growl deepened, teeth bared silently. Ethan's heart hammered. A voice inside whispered that this stranger was here for the same reason Daniel Moore had vanished, for the same reason someone sealed a box beneath the stones. And now the secret was moving again. Before Ethan could lift the rifle, the figure turned and slipped back into the trees, swift, silent, trained. Ethan didn't chase. He couldn't leave the evidence behind. Instead, he replaced the slab just enough to hide the hole, keeping the lockbox and notebook beside him. That eerie tightening in his gut returned, stronger than before. He looked down at Shadow. "They know we're here," he whispered. Shadow didn't blink. For the first time since arriving, Ethan fully understood. This house was never abandoned. The truth was never forgotten. It had only been waiting for someone to disturb the ground above its grave. Night fell heavier than usual, as though the mountains themselves wanted to swallow the cabin whole. Ethan bolted the door and checked each window twice. He had placed Daniel's notebook and the green lockbox under his bed, not the most secure hiding spot, but better than in plain sight. Shadow lay near the hearth, chin on his paws, eyes wide open like twin embers glowing in the dark. The dog's breathing was slow, yet every muscle remained taut and ready. Ethan envied his focus. His own thoughts churned restlessly, faces from war mixed with silhouettes in the forest. He forced himself to read a few pages from the notebook, but every line raised new questions. It wasn't just water contamination. Daniel had listed names, county officials, ranch owners, investors, all under a column titled, "Compliance Through Silence." Ethan didn't know what that meant, but Shadow's ears twitched sharply, pulling his attention away. The dog stood, gaze pinned to the window like an arrow locked on its target. Ethan set the notebook aside and reached instinctively for his rifle. The knock came suddenly. 3 slow, deliberate strikes that echoed through the cabin like hammer blows into bone. Ethan froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Shadow growled, low and dangerous, the fur along his spine rising like a warning flag. Whoever had come wasn't trying to sneak anymore. They wanted to be heard. Ethan dragged a chair quietly across the floor and pressed himself beside the door, shoulders tight. "Who is it?" he called, voice calm despite the sweat beading along his temple. The reply came. A deep, firm male voice practiced at authority but lacking any warmth. "Evening, Sheriff's Department." Shadow's growl deepened. Ethan breathed out slowly and opened the door just enough to see the man outside. The visitor wore a dark tan sheriff uniform. Dust settled into the creases, as if he had driven miles of back roads recently. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-chested, with close-cut black hair and a square jaw peppered with gray stubble. His amber-brown eyes looked sharp but guarded, like a predator assessing whether its prey would run or fight. His badge read, "Sheriff Cole Harrington." "Mind if I come in?" Harrington asked, voice deep but too casual for the hour. Ethan didn't move. "It's late," he answered. "What do you want?" The sheriff's lips curled in a fraction of a smile, but it never reached his eyes. "I just saw your truck returning at dusk. Wanted to introduce myself. Folks around here value good relationships." Shadow stepped between them, the embodiment of a barrier. Harrington eyed the dog with a flicker of irritation. "Quite the protector," he said. "Shadow can sense trouble," Ethan replied, tone flat. "That's so." Harrington tilted his head, letting his gaze drift toward the edges of the darkened cabin interior. "Place has a history, not always kind to newcomers." Ethan tightened his grip on the door. "I read the tourist brochure," he said dryly. "You finished?" A muscle jumped in the sheriff's jaw, small but telling. Then he leaned closer, his cologne sharp, his voice low enough only Ethan could hear. "Don't go digging where others already died, trying to uncover the truth." The warning was dressed as neighborly concern, but it slithered like threat. Ethan held his stare. "I do better when people are honest with me." Harrington's expression hardened. "Honesty's dangerous here. Sleep lightly." He stepped back into the moonlight, dust trailing behind his boots. As he reached his cruiser, he tossed one last look over his shoulder. It lingered, not on Ethan, but on the chimney stones. The cruiser's headlights cut through the dark as it pulled away, fading into the trees with a hum that echoed too long. Ethan shut the door, locking it quickly. Shadow pressed against his leg, tension vibrating under his fur. Ethan knelt, hand steadying the dog, but failing to steady himself. "Sheriff Cole Harrington," he muttered. "If you're here to help, then I'm a priest." He paced the room, mind unraveling knots faster than he could tie them. Harrington knew exactly what to warn him away from, and exactly where to look. That meant Daniel's disappearance wasn't a rumor, and Ethan's curiosity was already too loud. A thud outside startled him. Shadow rushed to the window, barking fiercely. Ethan killed the lantern. Darkness swallowed everything. He crouched beside the window, peering into the night. A figure stood in the distance again. Not Harrington. This one thinner, wearing a hooded jacket, shoulders hunched, watching. Breath caught in Ethan's throat. The stranger remained still, even as Shadow's barking shook the glass. Then, without a step or a sound, the figure faded backward into the forest shadows, as though consumed by the mountain itself. Ethan whispered to Shadow, "We're not alone, buddy." Shadow barked once in agreement, stance unwavering. Ethan didn't return to the notebook that night. Instead, he sat with his back to the wall, rifle across his legs, Shadow leaning against him like a shield of muscle and loyalty. Sleep never came. But when the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, he had already made a decision. Whoever wanted the truth buried should have left this house empty. Ethan Walker and Shadow were not leaving. Not now. Not ever. Morning arrived shy and quiet, but neither Ethan nor Shadow had slept enough to greet it. The air held a strange stillness, like the mountain was waiting to see whether they would run or stand their ground. Ethan wiped fatigue from his eyes and checked the windows again. Nothing moved outside. Yet Shadow remained restless, patrolling the cabin in slow circles, occasionally nudging the bed where the evidence was hidden. Ethan pulled out Daniel's notebook once more, determined to read deeper. A page toward the back caught his attention. Sketches of the mountains, marked with red X's and arrows pointing toward underground streams. Numbers beside them indicated toxin levels far above any safety limit. Further notes detailed a corporate entity, Kane Industries, a company known publicly for construction and job growth. But Daniel's writing exposed another side, illegal chemical dumping into the watershed, protected by those with authority. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen men in war willing to sacrifice anything for power. This felt no different. Shadow growled suddenly, a low warning, and Ethan snapped his head up. A faint sound scratched from outside, like metal brushing metal. Shadow rushed to the front window, snarling. Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved quickly toward the door, positioning himself to one side. A silhouette flitted past the glass. Then the handle jiggled violently. Someone was trying to break in. Ethan breathed steady, grounding himself in old training. Panic clouded judgment. Calmness helped survival. Shadow stood in front of him, body angled like a shield, teeth bared. The lock gave a sharp, metallic click. The door slowly pushed inward. Whoever was on the other side expected easy prey. Ethan kicked the door hard. It slammed outward and cracked against a man in black clothing. The intruder stumbled backward, revealing a lean figure with sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes, early 30s, sunken cheeks suggesting stress or substance abuse. His shaved head gleamed in the sunlight, and large tattoos sprawled across his neck, symbols etched in rough ink, like he was used to belonging to the wrong kind of brotherhood. He had the look of someone who lived by being told what to do and punished when he failed. The man hissed, recovering his balance and reaching for a baton at his belt. But Shadow was swifter, launching forward like a missile of fur and muscle. He slammed into the man's ribs, knocking him off the step. The baton clattered to the ground. The intruder yelled, kicking wildly, and Shadow clamped down on his forearm, the one reaching for a second weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Ethan stepped into the doorway, rifle aimed steady. "Stop, or you lose the arm." His voice was cold, the battlefield version of him returning like it never left. The intruder froze, eyes furious yet frightened. Blood already soaked his sleeve where Shadow's jaws held tight. Ethan pressed a boot to the man's chest. "Who sent you?" The intruder gritted his teeth but said nothing. Ethan increased pressure slightly. "You won't last long up here without that arm working." Still silence, though the man's eyes flickered toward the chimney, confirming more than any words. Shadow growled deeper, teeth grinding. Ethan finally gave a command. "Release." Shadow obeyed instantly, but remained close, snarling at the man who now clutched his bleeding arm. Ethan kicked the baton further away. "Get up, slowly." The man rose shakily, breath coming in angry bursts. He glared rather than speak. Ethan wasn't stupid enough to let him any closer. "You and your friends stay away," Ethan warned. "Next time you won't walk home." The man spat blood and dirt but backed away step by step. Then he stumbled into the tree line and vanished like a wolf slinking into brush. Ethan shut the door, bolting it forcefully. He leaned against it for a moment, heart thundering. Shadow sat beside him, chest rising and falling with adrenaline. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ears, his voice low. "You saved us again." Shadow nuzzled his hand, and for a brief breath, Ethan felt less alone in this war. He checked outside through the window. The forest remained motionless, but the quiet no longer felt neutral. Someone had tested his defenses. Others were watching. He sensed the shift. This wasn't a warning any longer. It was the beginning of a siege. Inside, the green lockbox waited. So did Daniel's truth. Ethan stared at the floor where the hidden compartment lay. The fight had already arrived at his door. He and Shadow faced it head-on. Whoever wanted that truth buried had underestimated the man and dog guarding it now, and they would regret it. Night bled into the cabin like ink spreading across a blank page. Ethan reinforced the front door with a heavy wooden beam, then dragged a dresser against the back window. It wasn't panic, just strategy. Years of combat had trained him to survive by never underestimating the enemy twice. Shadow patrolled restlessly, nails clicking against the wood floor, breath uneven, as if he sensed the mountain holding its breath again. Ethan returned to the table where the green lockbox waited. He hadn't opened it yet. Until now, every moment had been about defense. But defense alone didn't win battles. He retrieved a metal chisel and tapped carefully along the latch until the aged mechanism gave way with a sharp metallic crack. Shadow paused mid-pacing, ears snapping toward the sound. Inside the lockbox were sealed vials of murky liquid, their surfaces labeled with dates and GPS coordinates, along with an envelope of photographs. Ethan held one toward the lantern light. Images of dead fish floating belly up in a creek. Children's shoes abandoned beside water lines marked with contaminated. Then pictures of Barrett Kane, CEO of Kane Industries, a tall, stocky man with slicked-back silver hair, expensive suits stretched over a self-gratified belly. His smile was wide but malicious, the smile of someone who never heard no. A typed report beneath described how Kane's company dumped toxic waste into the groundwater to cut costs, turning the valley into a slow poisoning. Ethan clenched his jaw. People here were dying quietly, while officials cashed checks. The sickness of power. It was worse than any battlefield. Shadow suddenly stiffened, nose raised skyward. Ethan silenced the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed them, except for faint moonlight slipping through the cracks around the boards. Then came the first sound. Tires crushing gravel, slow and controlled. Headlights briefly cut through the forest, the beams searching, hunting. Ethan moved to the window, keeping low. A black SUV, sleek and too new for mountain roads, crept toward the house. The engine idled, lights dimmed. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, different from the desperate intruder earlier. This one carried himself with confidence, like he believed he owned the night. He stood tall, mid-40s, muscular under a tailored dark jacket. His hair, deep brown streaked with gray, was combed back sharply. His face was angular, handsome in a severe way. Cheekbones carved like stone, a straight nose and a trimmed beard outlining a jaw built from stubbornness. His eyes were cold steel. He looked like someone who won battles through intimidation rather than bullets. He scanned the cabin slowly, gaze sharp enough to peel back the wood. Beside him emerged a flashlight beam handled by a second man, broad-shouldered, bald, and wearing tactical gloves. That one looked like he broke bones for a living, and smiled doing it. Neither looked like small-time muscle. Tim Bjartid, man spoke once, his voice a rich baritone carrying command. Make it quick! The bald man moved toward the propane tank stored by the wall. Ethan's blood ran cold. Arson. They weren't just here to intimidate. They wanted to erase him. He reached for his rifle, but Shadow growled, warning him to wait. Timing mattered. A sudden beam of headlights exploded from behind the SUV, flooding the clearing. The intruders turned, half-blinded. A white service truck screeched to a halt, and from the driver's side leapt Mia Carter. Her green eyes were blazing with fear and fury, her brown ponytail whipping as she sprinted forward. She held a long metal flashlight like a weapon. The bald man charged her instantly. "Shadow!" Ethan barked. The dog launched through the door before Ethan could react. It burst open like a lungful of rage, and Shadow zeroed in on the bald attacker, colliding with him mid-stride. They both crashed into dirt, Shadow tearing and snarling with desperate force. Mia swung her flashlight at the bearded man, but he blocked easily and shoved her to the ground. Ethan fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of gunfire ripping through the trees. "Leave her!" he shouted. The bearded intruder locked eyes with Ethan. For a breath, silence ruled, danger poised on a knife's edge. Then, with a signal flick of his hand, he retreated to the SUV. The bald man kicked free from Shadow and scrambled after him, clutching his bleeding arm. Tires spun, gravel sprayed, and the vehicle vanished back into the forest. Shadow raced a few steps after them, then turned back to Mia and Ethan, chest heaving. Ethan rushed to Mia and helped her stand. Her palm was scraped, but she waved it off. "I saw the sheriff's cruiser leaving earlier," she said breathlessly. "Something didn't feel right. I came to check on you." The moon reflected determination in her green eyes. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was choosing a side. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You came in time." She nodded once, gaze shifting to the dark forest. "They'll return," she whispered. Ethan looked at Shadow, his protector, his alarm, his last line of hope. Then he looked at the notebook and lockbox inside the cabin. "They already have," he replied. Morning came soft and golden, as if the sky itself refused to believe how close the mountain had come to burning in the night. Smoke still lingered in thin gray ribbons above the clearing, curling past the stone chimney like ghosts reluctant to leave. The black streaks of scorched wood on the outer wall told the truth. If Shadow hadn't launched himself into the fight, and if Mia's headlights hadn't cut through the dark when they did, the house would have gone up like dry tinder. Now it stood wounded but alive, like its owner. Ethan stepped out onto the front steps, boots crunching across charred pine needles, and let the cool summer air fill his lungs. His shoulders ached, his knuckles were scraped, and somewhere deep inside, the old familiar weariness of combat tugged at him. Shadow followed, moving a little slower than usual, his 9-year-old frame bearing the stiffness of last night's collision. The dog's coat, silver and chestnut in the morning light, was smudged with ash, but his amber eyes were bright, proud, and unafraid. He stayed pressed against Ethan's leg, as if to say, "We're still here." Behind them, Mia poured water into a kettle over the gas stove, motions brisk but careful. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a thin tremor in her fingers that she tried to hide. In the daylight, the small cuts on her palms and elbow were more visible, but so was the quiet steel in her posture. She wasn't just a scientist who loved the forest anymore. She was someone who had chosen a side and paid a price for it. When Ethan came back inside, she handed him a chipped mug of coffee and opened Daniel Moore's notebook on the table, its worn leather cover now smudged where her thumb had pressed it too tightly. "We can't just sit here and hope they get bored," she said, voice steady despite her tired eyes. "Kane won't stop until this house, those samples, and probably us are gone." Ethan stared at the green lockbox, its open lid revealing vials, photos, and reports, the quiet weapons of a dead man's war. He thought of Daniel, of scribbled notes in the margins, of arrows pointing to poisoned streams where children once played. A wave of something like survivor's guilt washed over him. He'd come to this mountain to disappear, while another man had vanished because he refused to. "Then we take the fight to them," Ethan said. The words surprised even him a little, but once spoken, they fit. He reached for his phone, an old model but still reliable, and scrolled to a buried contact. Mark Jensen. Mark was in his mid-40s now, with dark blonde hair usually kept too long for military regulations, and a habit of rubbing the bridge of his nose when he was thinking hard. Once he had been the squad's radio operator, quiet and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who remembered everything. After leaving the army, he had turned that same precise focus into investigative journalism, digging into stories no one else wanted to touch. corruption, war contracts, missing funds. He hunted them all with the stubbornness of someone who had seen friends die for less. Ethan stepped out onto the porch for a better signal and dialed. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered, roughened by too much coffee and too many deadlines. Jensen. Ethan could almost see him. Glasses smudged, shirt sleeves rolled up, laptop open and surrounded by stacks of notes. Mark, it's Ethan. A pause, then a sharper tone. Walker? Hell, man. I thought you dropped off the map on purpose. I tried, Ethan said. The map followed me. He briefly laid out the story. The house, the poisoned water, Daniel Moore's disappearance, Kane Industries, the sheriff's threats, the attack last night. Mark listened without interrupting, but Ethan could hear the clack of a keyboard, the scribble of a pen. You're sure about the evidence? Mark asked finally. Lab reports, samples, photos, names, Ethan replied. Enough to blow this valley open. Another pause, then a sigh Ethan knew well. The sound Mark made when he realized he'd just found a story that would consume him. All right, Mark said. You send me everything. I'm looping in a contact at the bureau. She's been waiting for a case like this. Inside, Mia pulled her laptop from her bag and set it on the table. The device bore scratches and stickers from various field projects, a life lived outdoors and in data. I can scan and encrypt the files, she said. We'll upload them to Mark and store backups off-site. Ethan brought the lockbox over. Together, they worked quickly. Mia taking photos of every page, every vial label, every topographic mark, while Ethan annotated what he remembered from Daniel's notes. Shadow lay by the door, ears flicking whenever the forest murmured, guarding in silence. An hour later, the last file bar crawled across the screen and turned green. The evidence was no longer just hidden under stone. It was scattered across encrypted servers, bouncing through networks beyond the reach of one company or one crooked sheriff. Mark called back sooner than Ethan expected. I've reviewed enough to know this is real, he said. I sent it to Special Agent Elena Ruiz at the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. She's tough, late 30s, sharp jawline, hair dark, and always tied back like she hasn't got time for it, and eyes that make you feel like she's already fact-checked your soul. She lost a younger brother to contaminated drinking water in a mining town when she was a kid. She doesn't forget. Or forgive. Ethan glanced at Mia. She was listening intently. What did she say? He asked. She said, Mark replied, and I quote, "Tell your friend to stay alive and stay put. We're coming heavy." The waiting that followed was the worst part. Hours stretched like days as clouds rolled in, casting shifting shadows over the valley, Ethan and Fon. Mia fortified the cabin again, not as a tomb, but as a line in the dirt. They placed extra water at the back, loaded Ethan's rifle and Mia's flare gun, and kept the evidence copies on a USB drive around Mia's neck. Shadow paced, then finally settled in front of the hearth, chin on his paws, eyes never fully closing. By late afternoon, the distant thump of rotors broke the mountain's silence. Ethan stepped outside, hand resting on Shadow's head. 2 helicopters emerged over the ridge, one bearing the markings of the state police, the other matte, black, and unmarked. From the dirt road below, a convoy of vehicles approached, a pair of dark SUVs followed by 2 white pickup trucks with agency decals. For a terrible second, Ethan remembered the last time vehicles had come up this road, and then he saw the difference. There were no hurried, furtive movements, no engines idling with their lights off. These arrivals came with sirens off, but authority blazing. The first SUV stopped in the clearing. A woman climbed out, her posture straight, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a navy suit jacket over tactical pants, a badge clipped at her belt, and an air of controlled intensity around her. Her skin was a warm olive tone, her features sharp, and when she looked at Ethan, her brown eyes seemed to weigh him and the house and the chimney all at once. "Mr. Walker?" she called. "I'm Special Agent Elena Ruiz, FBI." Behind her, uniformed agents fanned out, securing the perimeter with calm precision. Another car pulled up, a rental with dust on the bumper. Mark Jensen stepped out, exactly as Ethan had pictured. Thin but wiry, blonde hair a bit too long, glasses slipping down his nose, messenger bag hanging from one shoulder stuffed with papers and a recorder. Ethan walked forward with Shadow at his side. "You picked a dramatic entrance," he said. Ruiz's expression softened for a heartbeat. "You sent dramatic evidence." She nodded toward the house. "May we?" Inside, Ethan and Mia laid out the physical samples, the original notebook, and the lockbox. Ruiz's gloved hands moved with respect as she examined them. "We already have enough from your scans to obtain federal warrants," she said. "Kane Industries, Sheriff Cole Harrington, several county officials. They'll be answering questions in handcuffs." Mark grinned, the kind of grin he only reserved for stories that would actually change something. "Told you," he said quietly to Ethan. "You didn't just buy a haunted house. You bought a revolution." The arrests didn't happen at gunpoint in the clearing. They unfolded over the next days in town halls and polished offices and gated driveways. Kane led away in cuffs, his expensive suit crumpled. Harrington glaring beneath the weight of a different badge now reading U.S. Marshal Custody. News vans arrived, then government cleanup teams with trucks and temporary water tanks. The poisoned wells were tested, the contamination mapped, and long-term remediation plans put in motion. Residents who had whispered in fear began speaking out loud, their stories finally heard. Weeks later, summer settled into a gentler rhythm. The burned streaks on the cabin were scrubbed away, boards replaced, windows redone. The stone chimney remained untouched, a proud pillar of gray rock holding up a new roof. Children from the valley came with their parents to thank Ethan and Mia, some shy, some bold enough to run their hands over Shadow's back, while he basked in the attention, tail thumping in lazy approval. Mia stood on the porch one afternoon, sun warming her shoulders, watching as a group of volunteers planted young saplings along the creek. Her hair, usually tied back for work, fell loose around her face, catching the light. She turned to find Ethan carrying a box of tools, sleeves rolled up, a rare, easy smile tugging at his mouth. There was still tiredness in his eyes, but also something new, peace that didn't feel borrowed. "So," she said, leaning on the porch rail, "you still planning on disappearing?" Ethan set the box down and looked out over the valley, its water sparkling clearer now, the air smelling less of fear and more of pine and possibility. Shadow lay sprawled between them, belly exposed to the sun, finally relaxed enough to sleep deeply. "Seems this place needs someone who doesn't vanish when things get hard," Ethan replied. "And Shadow's decided this is home." At the sound of his name, the dog gave a sleepy woof, as if confirming the decision. Mia smiled. "Then I guess the mountain wins," she said. "It keeps you." Ethan shook his head gently. "No," he answered. "We chose each other." The wind rose softly, carrying the sound of laughter from the creek, The knock of hammers from the new water station, and the rustle of leaves against the rebuilt walls. The house on the mountain was no longer a grave for secrets. It was a starting place for justice, for healing, for a quiet life finally earned. Ethan rested a hand on Shadow's chest and another on the warm wood of the railing. For the first time in years, when he looked toward the horizon, he didn't see an exit. He saw a future. Sometimes, God does not send angels with wings. Sometimes, His miracles arrive in the quiet footsteps of a loyal dog, in the courage of a woman who refuses to look away, or in the heart of a man who chooses to stand up for others when running would be easier. Faith is not always loud. Often, it is a whisper saying, "Don't give up. The light is still here." Ethan, Mia, and Shadow remind us that the biggest battles of this life are not fought on distant front lines. They happen in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and in the silent corners of our hearts. Wherever there is injustice, God calls ordinary people to rise and become protectors of what is good. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and comment your prayer for those still fighting their unseen battles. And if you believe that loyalty, courage, and love are the greatest gifts God gives us, subscribe to this channel so more souls can find light in the dark. May the Lord bless you. May He watch over your home as faithfully as Shadow watched over Ethan. And may you always remember, miracles don't only happen in Scripture. They still walk among us every day.